Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this second session in the Open Educational Resources in RDM webinar series. My name is Catherine DeVita. I'm the training coordinator with the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, and I will be one of your moderators today. This is a bilingual session with questions being answered in English and in French, and English and French interpretation available to you. In this session, we will discuss RDM in the Canadian context, a guide for practitioners and learners, which is a fully bilingual OER textbook that was developed by Canada's RDM community. Bonjour à toutes et à tous, et merci de vous joindre à nous pour cette deuxième session de la série de webinaires sur les ressources éducatives libres en gestion de données de recherche. Je m'appelle Catherine DeVita, je suis la coordinatrice de formation avec de l'Alliance de recherche numérique du Canada et je serai l'une de vos modératrices aujourd'hui. Cette session est bilingue avec une interprétation en anglais et en français à votre disposition. Dans cette session, nous discuterons de la gestion de données de recherche dans le contexte canadien, un guide pour les praticiens et les apprenants, qui est un manuel entièrement bilingue en REL développé par la communauté canadienne de GDR. I would like to acknowledge that I'm working from Montreal, situated on the unceded traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations. As we proceed with our webinar session today, it is with acknowledgement of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, the nations and communities who have been harmed by colonial and unethical research, and of the data sovereignty and research priorities of these nations and communities. On behalf of the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, we commit to understanding and taking up our role in reducing harm and advancing reconciliation in research. Donc, je tiens à reconnaître que je travaille depuis Montréal, situé sur le territoire traditionnel non cédé par les Kanien'kehá:ka, un lieu qui a longtemps servi de lieu de rencontre et d'échange entre de nombreuses Premières Nations. Alors que nous poursuivons notre session de webinaire aujourd'hui, nous le faisons en reconnaissant les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis, ainsi que les communautés qui ont été blessées par la recherche coloniale et non éthique, et en tenant compte de la souveraineté des données et des priorités de recherche de ces nations et communautés. Au nom de l'Alliance de recherche numérique du Canada, nous nous engageons à comprendre et à assumer de notre rôle dans la réduction des préjudices et la promotion de la réconciliation dans la recherche. The Alliance seeks to provide a welcoming, engaging, and safe community for everyone. Discriminatory language is not appropriate in any venue or platform. The Alliance does not tolerate harassment in any form. Harassment is understood as any behavior that threatens another person or group or produces an unsafe environment. L'Alliance s'engage à offrir à tous les participants et participantes une expérience accueillante, stimulante et sécuritaire. Le langage et les images discriminatoires ne sont aucunement tolérées pendant les événements ou sur les plateformes. L'Alliance n'accepte par ailleurs aucune forme d'harcèlement qui est défini comme étant tout comportement qui menace une autre personne ou un groupe ou qui produit un environnement non sécuritaire. So it's now my pleasure to introduce to you today's panelists. Il est maintenant avec plaisir que je vous introduis à nos panélistes d'aujourd'hui. Liz Hill is a data librarian at Western University. She's also a member of the editorial team of the textbook. Alors, Liz est bibliothécaire de données de l'Université Western. Elle fait aussi partie de l'équipe éditoriale du manuel. Danielle Denny is a research data librarian at Concordia University and also a member of the editorial team. Danielle Denny est bibliothécaire de données de recherche à l'Université Concordia et fait également partie de l'équipe éditoriale. Caroline Baril is an RDM analyst with Calcul Québec. Caroline Baril est analyste en gestion de données de recherche avec Calcul Québec. Erin McPherson and Louise Gillis are both librarians at Dalhousie University. Erin McPherson et Louise Gillis sont bibliothécaires à l'Université Dalhousie. Annalise Aber is an RDM librarian at the University of Waterloo. Annalise Aber est bibliothécaire en gestion de données de recherche à l'Université de Waterloo. Et finalement, Rose Velinar, whose name I'm so sorry, I didn't make it to the slides. I will add them after the fact, is a research associate with Gateway. Et finalement, Rose de Velinar, dont j'ai oublié malheureusement d'ajouter à ce document, est associée de recherche chez Gateway. Finally, our moderators for today will be Jen Abel, RDM librarian at the University of Calgary. She's also one of two co-chairs of the RDM, the National Training Expert Group, and Nick Rockland, RDM specialist with UBC's Advanced Research Computing team, and is also co-chair of the RDM, the National Training Expert Group. Nos modérateurs et ma modératrice pour aujourd'hui seront Jen Abel, bibliothécaire en gestion de données de recherche à l'Université de Calgary. Elle est également coprésidente du groupe d'experts en formation nationale sur la GDR. Il y aura aussi Nick Rockland, spécialiste en gestion de données de recherche au sein de l'équipe de calcul avancé de recherche de l'Université de la Colombie-Britannique. Il est aussi coprésident du groupe d'experts en formation nationale sur la GDR. So I'll now pass it over to Nick and Jen. Je vais maintenant passer le micro à Jen et Nick.
All right, well, go ahead, Jen. I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're actually going to start by passing the mic over to Liz and Danielle, who are going to do some short presentations. Nous allons donner la parole à Liz et Danielle pour leur courte présentation.
Thank you. I think I'm going first. This is Liz speaking. So I'm just going to share some information about the textbook itself. As most of you know, Canada's federal funding agencies launched their policy on research data management in early 2021. In response to the policy, during that summer, a group of experts from Canada's data community began to discuss the need to develop a research data management resource that could be used for teaching this topic in Canada. Canada has its own set of regulations, standards, and resources, as well as two official languages, French and English. But because of the lack of an appropriate RDM teaching resource, in order to teach their classes, instructors have been cobbling together a mix of texts, articles, and web pages that in some cases were outdated, or in other cases from other countries. The group that I mentioned previously formed an RDM OER listserv and held community Zoom calls. Out of this group of data experts, a smaller group of librarians decided to take the lead on this project with the goal to develop a textbook on research data management in the Canadian context that would be an open, edited, and peer-reviewed collection of chapters. Chapter authors and peer reviewers were primarily data specialists and data librarians supporting RDM in Canadian post-secondary institutions, and also included some individuals with knowledge in specific areas who were invited to contribute, including authors with expertise and knowledge of Indigenous data sovereignty. For those who haven't had a chance to look at the book, we're going to put some links to that text in the chat.
I'm doing so right now.
Okay. And now I'm going to hand over a bit more of the description to Danielle.
Great, thanks so much. Alors, pour continuer là où Liz s'est arrêtée, pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas le livre, je vais le décrire brièvement. Alors, il y a 18 chapitres qui sont répartis en 5 sections. Les chapitres de la première section abordent les bases de la GDR, y compris un chapitre sur la souveraineté sur les données autochtones. La deuxième section contient des chapitres qui décrivent la GDR au Canada, tels que l'historique et les politiques. La troisième section s'intitule « Méthode de travail avec les données de recherche » et les chapitres portent entre autres sur le nettoyage des données, les métadonnées, la curation et la préservation. Dans la 4e section, on se consacre aux différents types de données. Alors, on parle ici des données qualitatives, quantitatives, géospatiales et les données sensibles. Puis finalement, dans la dernière section, il y a 2 chapitres qui jettent un regard un peu plus critique sur certains aspects de la GDR. Chaque chapitre, on va y trouver des objectifs d'apprentissage et aussi différents types d'exercices. Alors, je vais conclure en disant que le travail éditorial a été une occasion vraiment exceptionnelle d'apprentissage pour toute l'équipe éditoriale. En tant qu'éditrice, on a pu se familiariser avec des notions de pédagogie, avec l'importance d'utiliser un vocabulaire clair et accessible, et particulièrement les difficultés liées à la traduction d'informations très techniques. On a ici aussi beaucoup appris sur les différents processus de demande de subvention et sur le travail au sein d'une équipe bilingue. Et finalement, tout au long du processus, c'était vraiment très important pour l'équipe éditoriale de maintenir l'enthousiasme et un certain niveau d'implication de la communauté d'experts qui a lancé le projet en 2021. So short and sweet, but I'm going to hand it back to the moderators so we can hear from the panelists on their use of the textbook.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks so much. That was a great introduction. And yeah, so we're going to kick it off with talking to some of the contributors and how they've been engaging with this. And so starting with maybe Luis and Aaron, who have a bit of a package deal, but Luis, we can start with you just so there's no uncertainty. Can you please start by introducing yourself and describing how you've used the textbook?
Sure, yeah. My name is Louise Gillis, and I'm Research Data Management Librarian at Dalhousie. And for me, the textbook became a really valuable resource when I paired up with Aaron to teach an elective course in the Master of Information Science program here at Dalhousie. So this course had been offered in the past, and I think we heard in the introduction that typically with these types of courses, there's a cobbled together list of resources that instructors point their students toward. And so when this textbook became available, it really fills a need, and we used it to shape some of the coursework that we taught. I'll hand things over to Erin.
Okay, thanks, Lise. Yeah, so hi, I'm Erin McPherson, and I'm a research and instruction librarian here at Dalhousie, and I'm on the Truro campus, so just a little bit away from Louise. And yeah, we were co-teaching an RDM elective in the MI program at Dal, and it was really, it really stood out to us. You know, it had some really beneficial features. In one, it was very accessible, so it was online and openly available, but also the Canadian context. For me, having been working in RDM for the past number of years, it was really helpful to have a book that drew on actual experiences that we're doing and the environment that we're working in. Don't know. Anything else?
I think that's a fantastic start. We can definitely drill down further with what you've said there. But moving on to Annalise, can you introduce yourself and how you've used the textbook?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Annalise Ebert, and I'm the Research Data Management Librarian at the University of Waterloo. Coming to RDM as an early career librarian, this textbook was really integral for my career development and professional development because, like we've mentioned a couple times, the coursework that you get is a lot of cobbled together pieces from various countries, and the resources are really great, but they don't always give you that Canadian perspective. So for me, the coursework that I got that was cobbled together with different resources can only bring you so far. So having this Canadian resource, which became very much like a companion resource for me, was really helpful as an early career librarian to kind of give me the knowledge that I'd have something to go to when I had questions that I didn't know how to answer, and to also kind of push that education further and explore different aspects of RDM that perhaps I didn't explore before starting as a librarian. But it really gave me that confidence to know that there is a resource out there with specific Canadian information out there to keep moving forward.
Okay, that's fantastic and awesome to hear. And then, okay, I think we can move on to Rose now. If you could introduce yourself and how you've been using the textbook.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank everyone for putting this wonderful, wonderful open textbook together. And as a researcher, I have been very lucky as a research specialist to help researchers to plan their research data management. The open access is a massively important feature. The chapters are clear. From the book, I have created a poster that I'm sharing with my researchers, asking them key questions on each of the steps. And then they can refer back to the book. And so I have 6 references, including the Tri-Council agencies, as well as direct access to the open access book. So again, thanks everyone.
Merci Rose. Et maintenant, nous passerons à Caroline. Caroline, pourriez-vous commencer par vous présenter et décrire comment vous avez utilisé le manuel?
Oui. Bonjour, je m'appelle Caroline Barry. Je suis analyste en gestion de données de recherche chez Calcul Québec depuis janvier 2024. Et puis, avant Calcul Québec, je faisais de la recherche, j'étais associée de recherche, donc de la recherche dans le domaine du cancer. Et puis, durant mes recherches, j'ai touché à plusieurs aspects du cycle de vie de la donnée, mais pas tous. Donc, le manuel a été vraiment important premièrement pour moi, pour apprendre. Je l'ai même utilisé dans un cours que j'ai pris à l'Université de Montréal pour faire un travail. Puis maintenant, ce que je fais, je l'utilise beaucoup pour préparer une présentation que je ferai sous peu à mes collègues chez Calcul Québec. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup. Our next question, and I think we'll start with Annalise for this one. Given the discussed audiences and the use cases, what does the textbook provide that other resources don't, that you've found?
Yeah, definitely. One of the biggest things for me was how accessible the textbook was, especially once there was a PDF version of it available. It was just so easy to kind of take as a pocket companion with me everywhere. I have it on my computer. It's not super big. It's easily searchable. So if I know I read the textbook cover to cover, but if I know I read something and I need to go back to it, I can easily search for keywords through it. But also building on that, it's also both broad and specific. So it has kind of that foundational RDM knowledge, but it also does get into like the nitty-gritty details to a degree. And it gives me some really great references to explore past that in the reference section. At the end of each chapter, it has additional things that I can go through and read. So it was a very broad and all-encompassing resource for me where I knew I could find anything about RDM if I needed to, or it would point me in the right direction at least. So it was really easy access, really easily accessible for me.
Oh, that's great. I'm impressed that you've read it cover to cover. I mean, I've read my chapter and maybe one other. So, Rose, how about you? What does the textbook give you that other resources don't?
So again, you can jump from chapter to chapter very, very easily and have the resources right beside you as you're going through your, let's say you're doing your ethics submission and you have questions about how to answer a particular question. So again, my focus is the researcher, and because it's so new to researchers to do research data management plans, and there's a very great Canadian context here that you have, and that's what I like to have almost on the screen side by side. And on l'a en français et en anglais, alors ça peut aider les chercheurs, the researchers can flip one volume to the next if they want to have clarification. Alors, un gros merci encore.
Sounds good. Et Caroline, compte tenu des publics et des cas d'utilisation évoqués, qu'est-ce que le manuel apporte de plus que d'autres ressources?
Oui, je vais reprendre un peu ce que Rose a dit dans mes descriptions. En fait, moi, ce que j'ai trouvé vraiment très intéressant avec le manuel, c'est que tout était au même endroit. Quand j'ai commencé, je cherchais beaucoup l'information à gauche, à droite, puis là, j'ai vraiment trouvé presque tout ce dont j'avais besoin. Puis, il y a beaucoup de liens vers d'autres manuels ou d'autres sites qui ont été importants pour moi. Aussi, j'avais regardé l'information sur la GDR en Europe, aux États-Unis, puis on n'avait pas vraiment quelque chose pour le contexte canadien là, à l'époque, disons l'année passée. Maintenant, on l'a, puis ça a été vraiment important pour moi. Puis, une chose qui était vraiment intéressante aussi, c'est d'avoir la version française et anglaise parce que, bon, moi, quand je suis arrivée chez Calcul Québec, j'ai eu un paquet d'acronymes à apprendre. Puis, bon, j'avais la version française et anglaise au même endroit. Donc, c'était vraiment utile. Merci.
Et il y a tant d'acronymes dans la GDR. Last but not least, Louise and Aaron, what did you get with this textbook that you didn't find other places?
Oh, Aaron, do you want to start with this one? I led last time.
Sure. I'm probably going to be similar to other responses. The Canadian context I thought was pretty essential to teach our MI students here. Lots of great resources available elsewhere, but I still feel RDM, even though, you know, we've been working on it for a number of years now, it's still fairly new as the policy was only introduced a few years ago. So having a bit of that history and the Canadian context as to why it's important here right now, I thought was really critical to convey to our future MI students. And so, and also maybe a little selfishly, it was nice to see the authors and I could see, oh, this is potentially where people are interested in and maybe some future contacts I can connect with in certain areas. But that was more of an aside. Did you have anything to add, Louise?
No, I think everything's really been said. It was just the Canadian context, because so many of our conversations are, you know, about the importance of RDM and then why is it important? Why are we talking about this? What is the so what? And then we talk about that specific Canadian context that tri-agencies have this policy and we're responding to that. So it's best practice, yes, but also you need to consider the space and the particular environment that we're working in. So that was huge. We did have we only had the 14 students. It was a very small and easy group to work with. It was wonderful. But we did get a lot of comments from that small group on how easy the text was to use. It was really accessible for the students. So they did appreciate that it was online, that they could search it really easily, as Annalise commented. But the readability, they commented on that as well. Just really accessible in that sense.
Okay, it's great. This seeing everybody herald this book is awesome. I want to be clear to all of the participants, please throw your questions in the chat, in the Q&A. We'd love to get more audience participation as much as we're having a great discussion here. With that said, to move on, and maybe I'll start with Rose here. And I'm not trying to take anything away from the quality of this book, but if there were to be a second edition that were produced, would there be any additions or changes that you might recommend or things that you would like to see from something like this going forward?
I think that this edition needs to, this one needs to have its time. There is absolutely, you know, the release was September 2023, and I've been looking at Tri-Council documents as well, and you know, I think a lot of us have to catch up to this release. So I would say let's give it some time. You know, things. You know, I'm still doing my distribution to my rural researchers, for example. And we're planning to get this kind of panel with the rural researchers that are across Canada. So they haven't seen this book. So I need more time is basically what I'm asking for, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. I know that it's such a new thing to so many people, right? So I understand this is very much still in the testing phase, but maybe Erin and Louise, you could speak to this because you've done the teaching, you've seen how the students have interacted with this.
Sure. Louise, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. Yeah, and I really appreciate Rose's perspective because I've made my little list of recommendations, but that idea that really it is a really solid product and that we can give it some time to sort of like settle is a fair point. So yeah, no, I really do think it's a great resource as is. I do think that the situation that Erin and I found ourselves in was a little bit tricky. So we had a few issues with it. And that's only because we took on the course 2 weeks before it was due to start. And we were working with an existing syllabus that had sort of modeled itself along the lines of an existing textbook. So we were trying to kind of make these two things fit together. And it didn't always fit perfectly. But that's more criticism of the course, isn't it, than the text. I think, though, what I did note about the text was that it didn't have, for me, as strong a through line as some other more established works like Cordy et al.'s researching or managing research data. And I think that was just, you've got all of these different brilliant authors contributing their work, and there isn't necessarily, like, and each of them stand alone independently really well, but then the connection between each of them isn't always incredibly strong. So I think that maybe if there could be something that kind of connected those even better would be awesome. I thought it would be really neat too if there was some what else did I think about? I had written a couple of comments down, but Erin, did you want to add something? I feel like I'm rambling.
No, that's okay. I guess one of the other additional challenges that we had with our course was it was previously an online course, and so we had to convert it into an in-person course. So from little tiny short video modules to 3-hour in-person lectures a week in one chunk. That was, I think, probably added an extra layer of complexity. So it would be useful for us, I think, to look at that next time we teach the course, like, because we'll have a different experience. We've had our first time with moving the course to in-person. A couple other things, I think we had some potential collaboration suggestions, maybe like discussion of RDM and its intersections with ethics, project management, data security, ITS, and things like that. But yeah, it was it was very useful.
I'm just going to yes to all of what Erin said.
And
then one other thing that I thought, and I think that this is actually something that the editors had hoped for as well, was just something on data curation. I think that that's an important topic that could we could use a deeper dive into that.
Yeah, and I imagine, more than 2 weeks preparation for a course will help shape things as well. So going forward, I think I'm interested to hear after next semester.
Yeah.
But that was a really interesting comment you made about the through lines between chapters, how they do operate very independently but flow into one another. And I think I want to ask this question again to Annalise, because you read it cover to cover. And so maybe you could speak to that and some other things that you might recommend for a second edition.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe it's because of my background in the sciences. The lack of through line for it really didn't, I didn't notice it as much. And perhaps that was because I was looking at them as like very distinct chapters and not using it as a teaching tool. I viewed the chapters very much as kind of like individual entities, if you will. So the lack of the through line, I wasn't even so much looking for the through line between chapter to chapter. And I very much so echo kind of what Rose has said, that it's a really fantastic resource and kind of needs its time to settle. What I'd love to see in the future as down the road, when there's perhaps a second edition is kind of a timeline of how this has evolved in the Canadian landscape. Like how has RDM changed since the Tri-Agency's RDM policy came into effect, and how has that changed? Like, what were schools' responses to that? So I'd love to see kind of a timeline of how those changes have affected RDM and how people have responded to, because I think that's really important to see how we've responded in a Canadian context to these very to these policies and whatnot. So I'd love to see kind of that history of RDM in Canada be expanded for a second edition. Not that it's not great right now, but I acknowledge that in a couple of years there will be more history to include that I'm really interested in.
Yeah, and I'll note in the chat that a representative from the tri-agencies who happens to be here today says, I'm speaking for myself here, but I think the tri-agencies would be happy to contribute a chapter on policy or a preface to a second edition if and when one gets planned down the road. But we won't hold him to that. Caroline, si une deuxième édition devait être produite, quel ajout ou changement recommanderiez-vous, peut-être?
Oui, oui. Mais évidemment, j'adore le livre dans sa forme actuelle, mais évidemment, on m'a demandé de trouver ou de commenter sur des ajouts futurs. Donc, j'en ai trouvé quelques-uns. En fait, moi, mon mandat chez Calcul Québec, c'est un peu d'appuyer les chercheurs pendant la phase active des données. Donc, moi, j'ai beaucoup aimé, en fait, la section numéro 3 du manuel, méthode de travail avec les données de recherche, puis plus particulièrement le chapitre 10, soutenir la recherche reproductive avec la curation active des données. J'aimerais peut-être qu'une future édition ait vraiment une plus grande section sur la gestion des données en phase active. C'est quelque chose auquel je réfléchis. C'est pas qu'il y a tant de matière que ça à ajouter, mais je pense que ça pourrait prendre un peu d'expansion. Puis, qu'est-ce que j'avais pensé? Ah oui, un truc qui pourrait être intéressant, peut-être avoir une section sur les Jupyter Notebooks, par exemple, comment les utiliser. Ensuite, peut-être que même une section pourrait être liée à un Jupyter Notebook. Par exemple, la section, je pense que c'est sur R. Donc, je ne sais pas s'il y a possibilité de lier un Jupyter Notebook avec un manuel.
Mais
Donc,
des chapitres sur les outils, peut-être.
Oui, en fait, oui, ça serait une excellente idée. Oui, ouais, tout à fait.
Oui, merci.
Voilà.
Oh, and I'm up next with the questions. So actually, I think we'll go with this one in French first. The question will be, for those of you in English, were there particular reasons why an open educational resource was important for your context? Caroline, y a-t-il des raisons particulières pour lesquelles une REL était importante dans votre contexte?
Oui, en fait, je dois avouer qu'avant janvier, j'avais jamais entendu parler de ressources éducatives libres. Le terme.
Vraiment?
Bon, oui, mais bon, je les utilisais toujours. J'avais juste pas mis un terme sur le type de ressources. Puis, en fait, c'est vraiment moi ce que je recherche. C'est très important. Souvent, on va arriver sur un portail où on doit s'enregistrer, puis souvent, on va... Moi, c'est pas quelque chose qui m'intéresse. J'aime que la ressource soit disponible maintenant, toujours, sans avoir nécessairement à s'enregistrer ou à payer. Bon, ceci étant dit, j'aurais payé pour un manuel comme ça. Donc, voilà. C'est très important.
Merci. Louise and Aaron, in the classroom context, were there particular reasons why an OER was important for you?
Yes. Probably obvious. Accessibility, it is free and openly available, and portable also. Like it was really important for us to have that accessible to the students. I don't know that I can add much beyond that. Louise, do you have anything?
No, that really big point, that really obvious one, just the accessibility. Our students truly appreciated it. We did as well. The portability, it was a great thing. So
yeah, and kind of related, like the hope that it can be, you know, easily updated and maintained as well, just where it was openly available. I thought, you know, that was a good opportunity. And also it kind of shows the students what you can do, that, you know, this is possible to have your textbook openly available as well.
yeah, and I mean, I think like it's not a requirement that when we talk about research data management, we, you know, segue into conversations about open scholarship, but the two are adjacent. And so when we can provide a textbook that is open, it kind of leads to a bigger conversation about open scholarship, open science, transparency, reproducibility, collaboration. And so I think that having this resource is just sort of a testament to the people that are working and believing in this work.
For sure.
Yeah, and it was definitely a community effort, and an excellent community effort. Yeah, I say, yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I am an author on one of the chapters, so
I have to say, totally, well, sort of related to that, we did talk a lot about the great RDM collaborative community in Canada, a lot, and how these things emerge from it, not just the book, but so many other resources and tools. And so that was important too. Like, this is kind of a product of that collaboration. That's just my plug for the great community here.
the example of what we can do when we all work together. Rose, for you, were there particular reasons why an open educational resource was important?
I have to follow up with one of the panelists who said previous to your book, we were looking around where we could get resources, and often we would end up in the UK or in USA. And I'm sure at this point, everyone's looking at your book. And I wanted to ask, this is just a question to see if you can track origin of the open access book. Is there a way to find out who's looking in? Is that possible?
I guess it's a question for the editorial team. Is there any way to track where users, downloaders are from?
I think that's something that Emily was trying to get a bit more information on from eCampus Ontario. But Christy's also on the call. I think we recently also noted that it had been uploaded to, I can't remember the site, but it was being highlighted at another level of open resources. So we're seeing places that people are getting it from, but I think we're still trying to figure out how to determine what the metrics would be.
Yeah, that would be very interesting to see. Rose, did you have other thoughts? No. Okay. So, Annalise.
I might be able to provide a quick comment on that. First, yeah, we're seeing it being linked from or hosted in US portals, but also I just opened the analytics. We're getting refers from all over the place. Page views. We've had 115 visitors today, 196 page views today. We're getting, it's being referred to from google.fr, Google in UK. Yeah, we can do we can figure out a certain amount from what we can see, but it's a bit limited, I'm afraid. Yeah.
I'd be interested to see how many page views there were in the last 45 minutes.
We've had about twice as many today as we usually have.
Je ne suis pas surprise. And Annalise, the OER nature of it, was that important for you?
Yeah, it was. I echo much of what everyone else has said, that it's important to have easy access. Free access is really important. But as someone who's gone time between working in academic institutions, I'm acutely aware of how expensive it is to buy these resources if you're going to buy them, or if you don't have access to them, or they're behind some sort of other wall that you can't access. So having an open educational resource for this is incredibly important for me as someone who has access, but also being aware that there are people who want to get into the field who maybe didn't get the RDM knowledge in school and would like to access these high quality resources to learn so they can get this information. I just think it's a really great way to get the RDM knowledge out there as well. Like we've talked about before, I feel like having the OER goes really well with kind of the nature of RDM in general and the kind of vibe, if you will, of RDM. So having it be an OER was really important, just in general.
Great. Thank you all so much. We have a question that came in the Q&A, and I think this might be one for the editors, and maybe this is also an opportunity to talk about the rapidity with which the RDM landscape and the landscape in which we're all working on RDM changes. From the Q&A we have, I have not read the textbook yet, but curious if this first edition includes information for the role of artificial intelligence in RDM, implications, best practices, etc.
I guess I could take that. It just, when we started putting the book together, remember this was back in 2021, 22, it just was not as big a thing. And also nobody reached out and volunteered to write a chapter. If someone had submitted, we'd put out an open call for submissions to the book with suggestions of some of the kinds of things we'd like to see. And we did reach out directly to people for features we knew had to be in there, or ended up writing a couple of them ourselves. But no AI research data management, AI experts in Canada happened to pop up in 2021, 22 and say, hey, I want to write that chapter. But if the person who shared that wants to contribute one, they're welcome to reach out.
Any other thoughts on AI? No?
No, but I'll add the comment that I'm loving the suggestions that did come in from the chat. The AI chapter was one that I hadn't considered. The chapter on tools, I think that's another really great suggestion. So you should have these panels more often just to like collect the ideas that all of the community here is sharing.
Yeah, and certainly if people, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you would like to write a chapter in the future, feel free to put that information into the chat or into the Q&A. Nick, I think you had something you were thinking about, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I was waiting for any participants to slip their questions in, but as I've been listening, some questions have been popping into my mind, and it's about this education aspect that librarians get. And I think it was something, Louise, that you touched on where, the idea of the OER is so great with data management, right? We're making data open, but these conjunctions between open science and RDM, which aren't always discrete, but it's generally how researchers see this thing. Like when you find researchers who are already engaged in good data practices, they're doing what they call open science. But more from the openness of methods, the registration of protocols, and from that. And so just wondering, and I can start with Erin Louise because you're teaching librarians about this, but I think this is a broader question. Do you think that this idea of combining RDM training with scholarly communications and other aspects of research really is the next step? And if so, what are the logistics of making it happen? It's a big question, I'm sorry, but that's just where my mind went.
That is such a big question, but my eyes went big when you said it, because yes, oh my gosh, so many times throughout last semester, I was just struck by how this, like, RDM is important in and of itself, but it also relates to scholarly communication in so many critical ways. And so it could easily become part of a conversation about ScholComm writ broad. How to make that happen? Erin, do you have thoughts?
I don't know. Well, I'm thinking about in the program, and I'll admit, when I was first approached to teach, like I had to think of the whole curriculum. How does this course tie into the other courses that the students are able to take? And I always think about, and ScholComm, I fully admit, is one that I see real connections with. As we do work with our ScholComm librarians quite a bit, because often the questions are there is some a relation there. How to make it happen? I don't know. For our course, I would like to look at the curriculum a little bit more broadly, to see how our course ties into others on similar topics, because that is something I noticed, that some concepts that we may be teaching are maybe in other classes as well. And I want to think about how all these pieces tie together, because there are connections. Yeah, that's how I'm thinking about it for our course. But in terms of other things, I'm not sure yet. I don't know. Did you have anything, Louise? Anything else?
Je pense que Caroline a des pensées sur ce sujet. C'est difficile à dire.
Juste un commentaire que peut-être certains m'ont déjà entendu en parler quand j'apprenais à mes collègues, mes anciens collègues avec qui je faisais de la recherche, que j'allais travailler chez Calcul Québec, puis que j'allais faire de la gestion de données de recherche. Donc, c'était des chercheurs, des PI, des étudiants, des associés de recherche. En fait, personne ne savait ce que c'était, la gestion de données de recherche. Pourtant, donc, je pense qu'il y a vraiment, c'est important de justement d'avoir peut-être un cours à l'université, ne serait-ce qu'un seul dans chacune des, je ne sais pas moi, des bacs, mais bon, encore faut-il convaincre les universités, je ne sais pas.
Oui, et tous les chercheurs gèrent leurs données, mais si ils ou elles utilisent des bonnes pratiques, c'est une autre question.
Non, oui, tout à fait.
Liz.
Yeah. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on some of the comments that were made about the possibility of a second edition, which as the editors, we'd love to see, but it doesn't mean that we have to be the editors for the second edition. I think we saw as the project was rolling along that, maybe the broader community could sort of think of some way to take that up, and maybe under some umbrella of the Alliance or the training group, we could see how we could look at, next steps as new topics unfold. But I think that's probably a bigger discussion for the community.
Well, and I think maybe that's an interesting question to bring up here. We talked about it a bit during the last webinar, but maybe the editors can speak to the fact that this was not something that happened just out of the goodness of everyone's hearts. There were costs, there was logistics involved. Can you maybe speak a little to that and what does go into making a resource like this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in a very short description of the timeline, we went from scoping it as a project. We were fortunate that the English editors were all here at Western. So Christy, who's on the call, and myself and Emily Carlisle Johnston, who's an OER specialist, kind of pulled together the scope of the project and came up with a call for proposals. And of course, as we were seeing that it needed to be a bilingual text, we engaged with Danielle Denis and Emily Fortin in Quebec. But there were costs associated with needing to copy, edit, and translate the resource as well. So we spent quite a bit of time applying for funding grants, as well as coordinating all the phases of submissions for chapter concepts to accepting to proofreading, getting copy editors, and the community participated in a wide way, either as chapter authors or peer reviewers in some cases. Christy, Danielle, Emily, anything you want to add to that?
I just do want to comment on what an incredibly time-consuming process this was for everybody involved, and how amazingly lucky we were to have a confluence of people with the right expertise, like working with Danielle, who was fluently bilingual and could coordinate the English and the French sides of the project and make sure that we had the French contributors as well as the English-speaking contributors. Having some experience working on book projects and major journal projects, Emily being an OER specialist. And then I ended up doing some of the funding. There's a question in the chat about how is this project funded? This project was funded through SHIRT grants, through a Compute Ontario grant, through about 4 or 5 different small-scale grants from different universities. We got a Western research grant, a library grant, and I basically spent a large part of my time, over a year, applying for funding. The SHIRT application ended up being a form that was over 80 pages long, and that took me literally 2 months of filling things out for. So this isn't really just a kind of, it wasn't exactly crowdfunded. The work to do it was crowdfunded and voluntary, but getting all of that done was a huge amount of work. Should some group like the Alliance or the Tri-Agency or somebody want to take over committing to making sure that future editions of the book were not just professionally translated, but also professionally copy edited, because we had somebody, we hired professional copy editors who work with textbooks to make things easier to read and more usable, more user-friendly, because a lot of the stuff that was originally submitted was at too technical a level and we were too close to it to realize that. So just the fact that it is such a useful resource comes down a lot to the amount of money we were able to raise. And I'm not sure any of us want to go through that again.
And certainly speaks to the need for coordinated ways to support these projects. And I see a note in the chat saying noted, interesting, by representatives of the tri-agencies. We have time probably for one last question. It's kind of a big one. And I think Annalise has volunteered to answer this. From Judith. I'm an imaging scientist in life sciences. RDM is my daily job. I've had a hard time connecting with librarians in the past. Any thoughts on the best strategies to connect librarians and research scientists? Oh boy, this is a big question. Annalise, do you really want to give it a try?
This is a really big question, but I'd love to give some sort of answer. Coming from a research background myself, one of the biggest things I noticed kind of making the change from research to librarianship was that lots of people in research are already doing RDM, but they don't always call it RDM. So librarians and researchers are doing a lot of the same work, but they're using different language. So I think that's one of one of the biggest roadblocks here is the language we're using can be a deterrent. Not that that's really an answer on how to best connect people, just acknowledging that there is a roadblock in the language we use. But acknowledging that, I think, goes a long way to kind of developing a shared language between researchers and acknowledging and finding the people on campuses who are also doing RDM work and perhaps creating groups together, discussions together, and kind of just opening up that connection. And it's very much something that I've been working on at Waterloo recently, is finding people on campus who are also doing RDM, but perhaps calling it something other than RDM, and talking about what the challenges are together, and just really opening up that conversation and creating kind of a safe place to ask questions, and a comfortable space where people feel comfortable coming to the library and asking these questions, or where the library feels comfortable going to other RDM specialists across campus and asking them what their experiences are with RDM, or what their challenges and roadblocks are. So I think this is a really big question, and there are lots of ways to address this question. But for me, one of the biggest things is kind of comes down to communication and language, and the types of communication and language that we're using with research scientists across campus.
That's perfect. Et Caroline, j'ai vu que vous avez commencé à écrire une réponse. Est-ce que vous voulez le dire? Peut-être?
Non, mais c'est parce que je connais Judith. Puis, en fait, j'ai commencé, mais j'ai pas trouvé de réponse.
Et c'est une grande question. C'est une grande question. Et je crois que Annelise a raison. La communication, le langage, les mots pour décrire les mêmes choses dans les lieux différents.
Mais peut-être que je peux ajouter que peut-être que c'est difficile pour le chercheur, le chercheur de dialoguer avec la bibliothécaire, mais peut-être que l'inverse aussi est vrai.
Oui.
Que le chercheur ne veut peut-être pas nécessairement avoir toute cette information-là. Puis, bon, donc ça va des deux côtés, je pense.
Oui, oui. C'est souvent que les bibliothécaires n'ont pas assez de connaissances dans la recherche.
Oui.
Et Rose, exactly. Researchers don't all have access to RDM librarians. We're still a fairly new breed. Stay tuned for research that Elisa Rod and I will be coming out with in the future. Just put that out there. I'm looking at, we're at time. I think Nick, is it time for us to call it?
There is, and it's a perfect question to call, because someone said, how can we stay in touch? How can we keep these conversations going? And it's such a hard question, because I'm not sure how to best organize these conversations. We're going to keep this series going. That is the intention, that we're looking to organize the next session in this series. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I mean, iAssist will have, we probably need to get back into having community calls again. I think this is something that we need to get into. CanLib data mailing list, Christy is mentioning in the chat. We will be sending out the link to the slides and the video after this, so maybe we can put some suggestions in there. But I think in the meantime, yeah, it's almost as if someone's, noted in the back chat, it's almost as if we need an RDM community of practice communication hub, but maybe we'll work on that in the future.
Yeah, we'll give it some thought offline, but that idea is not lost on us. I think it's a really important one, and one that a lot of people would be interested in.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you to all of our panelists. Merci à tous nos panélistes. And thanks to all of our attendees for your great questions, your thoughts, your attention. Merci à tous nos participants. Our next webinar will be happening, should be about mid-June. Stay tuned for details. We'll be talking about the Athabasca University mini course that's come out and some of the unique challenges there. Have a great rest of your week, everyone.